Ethan Carter's morning always began with the gentle hum of crickets and the warm glow of a rising sun over his beloved ranch. A decorated military veteran turned dedicated city official, Ethan had spent years restoring not only classic cars in his workshop, but also reviving the beauty of his sprawling property. Every tree, every weathered barn, and every stretch of dusty road told a story of resilience and hard work. This ranch wasn't just land to him. It was a legacy of independence and self-reliance. Ethan's love for his home was rivaled only by his passion for justice and the rule of law. His days were filled with long rides on horseback through the open fields and quiet evenings on his wraparound porch, where he meticulously maintained his prized collection of vintage vehicles. His humble yet dignified lifestyle was built on a foundation of hard work and personal responsibility. But everything changed the day Kerren, the self-appointed enforcer of a local HOA, appeared on his property. Kerren, touted by her fellow board members as the arbiter of suburban perfection, had a reputation for her ironclad adherence to outdated, arbitrary rules. With a clipboard in hand and a smirk that betrayed her inner certainty of superiority, she stepped onto Ethan's land with a single-minded purpose: to enforce the HOA's bizarre standards, regardless of whether Ethan had ever signed on. "Your porch lights are a public menace, Mr. Carter," Kerren declared, her tone dripping with condescension as she handed him a final warning notice. She claimed that the brightness of his lights disrupted the aesthetics of the community, despite Ethan's repeated explanations that his home was far removed from any HOA jurisdiction. Kerren's words carried a mix of entitlement and unyielding self-importance, qualities that had long fueled her crusade against anyone who did not fit into her narrow view of suburban perfection. Ethan's initial reaction was disbelief. How could someone try to police his property when he had always maintained it in a manner befitting his hard-won independence? "I've never agreed to these ridiculous rules," he thought. He replied coolly, "I maintain my property as I see fit. I have every right to enjoy my home without arbitrary interference." The first confrontation left Ethan with a deep, unsettling sense of injustice, and an even deeper resolve not to bow to Kerren's demands. The stage was set: a rugged individual who had spent his life upholding fairness versus an entitled bureaucrat who wielded HOA authority like a weapon. Ethan knew that this wasn't simply a matter of porch lights. It was the beginning of an all-out battle over personal freedoms and the rights of property owners. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the tension between Ethan and the HOA representative grew palpable, foreshadowing the escalating conflict that was about to engulf not only his home, but the entire neighborhood. In that moment, as Kerren's eyes flashed with smug superiority and Ethan's jaw tightened with determination, a silent promise was made. Ethan would not be bullied off his own land, and if necessary, he'd fight back with every resource at his disposal. The peaceful life he'd worked so hard to build was now under siege, and the first act of this modern-day David versus Goliath was underway. The following morning, Ethan awoke to a stark change: a crisp, official envelope taped to his front door. Inside lay a $750 fine, meticulously detailed as a penalty for community light violations. The document was printed in bold letters, and every line dripped with the cold authority of the HOA. As he read the fine, Ethan felt his blood boil. This was not merely an administrative error, but a clear power play. Outside, Kerren waited like a sentinel. With arms folded and an air of smug triumph, she declared to anyone within earshot, "The rules apply to everyone, Ethan. No exceptions." The neighborhood buzzed with whispers as some residents watched with curiosity, while others shook their heads in silent disapproval. For Ethan, however, this was a call to action. Refusing to be intimidated, Ethan immediately reached for his phone and began researching local zoning laws. Within minutes, he found legal statutes that clearly stated his right to maintain his property as he saw fit, rules that the HOA had no authority to enforce on his secluded ranch. In a calm yet firm tone, he recorded a short video addressing the fine and his decision to file a formal complaint with the local zoning office. Later that day, the situation escalated further. As word of the fine spread, inspectors began showing up unannounced. Their clipboards clicked, and they paced around his property, looking for any trace of violation. Kerren, ever the enforcer, hovered nearby, her eyes glinting with anticipation. "You'll see, Ethan," she sneered. "You can't defy the community standards forever." With every step the inspectors took, Ethan's resolve hardened. He knew that Kerren's tactics were designed to frighten him into submission, and perhaps even force him to concede. Yet he wasn't alone in his fight. Other residents, quietly fed up with the HOA's overreach, started expressing their own doubts about Kerren's legitimacy. Some whispered that her fines were nothing more than an excuse to exert control, while others recalled instances when rules had been applied selectively. Ethan's response was measured. He documented every interaction, snapping photos of the fine, recording the inspector's visits, and even noting down the exact words Kerren used. "This isn't justice, it's intimidation," he murmured as he sorted through his evidence. His plan was slowly forming. Gather enough proof to expose the corruption and overreach of the HOA and its self-righteous enforcer. That evening, after a long day of confrontation and bureaucratic back and forth, Ethan sat on his porch. The fine was pinned to a bulletin board, a symbol of the absurdity of the situation. As the night deepened, his thoughts turned to what would come next. Would the HOA simply continue down this dark path of abuse? Or was there a way to flip the script entirely? One thing was certain: Ethan would not be pushed around. In a town where the rules were written by those with power and enforced by a woman who believed herself above reproach, the seeds of rebellion had been sown. Kerren's first power move had only stoked the fires of resistance. Ethan's legal knowledge and determination had already begun to tip the scales in his favor. And as inspectors left and the fine remained, the battle lines were drawn ever more clearly between an individual fighting for his right to live freely and an HOA that saw itself as the ultimate arbiter of order, no matter the cost. The narrative continues as Ethan starts noticing a disturbing pattern: repeated fines, unexplained complaints, and an increasing number of neighbors whispering about irregularities in the HOA's practices. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan embarks on an investigation into the HOA's inner workings. Late at night, while reviewing documents he'd obtained from public records, he begins to notice that many of the fines and rule violations appear to be fabricated. One board member, hesitant but empathetic, confides in him about Kerren's misuse of HOA funds for personal luxuries. Over a series of tense encounters, Ethan discreetly sets up small cameras around his property. The recordings capture Kerren making dubious phone calls, her conversations laced with threats and boasting of her untouchable status. Every new piece of evidence only strengthened his resolve to take a stand, not just for himself, but for every homeowner who had been bullied into submission by an organization that cared more for appearances than fairness. At a secret meeting with a couple of concerned neighbors, Ethan lays out his findings. "I've seen it with my own eyes," he tells them, voice steady and resolute. "Kerren isn't just enforcing rules. She's making them up on the fly. We deserve to know the truth." Murmurs of agreement ripple through the room. Some had experienced their own run-ins with arbitrary fines and sneering warnings, though they had never dared to stand up to the HOA. Now, emboldened by Ethan's evidence and courage, they felt a spark of rebellion. Emboldened by the support, Ethan begins to plan a counterattack, a strategy that involves gathering every scrap of documentation, every recorded conversation, and every witness willing to testify about the injustice. He works late into the night, meticulously organizing evidence that would expose not only Kerren's overreach, but also the corrupt practices of the entire HOA board. With each new discovery, the scale of the corruption grew, and so did the risk. Kerren, noticing the shift in neighborhood sentiment, begins to take even more drastic measures. She starts sending out exaggerated notices of potential evictions and threatens property seizures if homeowners did not comply with her unreasonable demands. One particularly heated encounter finds Kerren storming up to Ethan's door, voice raised as she warned him of legal consequences if he did not get in line. But Ethan remains unmoved. "Your threats are empty," he says coolly, eyes locking with hers. "I have every right to stand my ground." The tension escalates as some board members begin to question Kerren's decisions. Rumors swirl that funds meant for community improvements have instead been funneled into Kerren's private projects. A luxury car here, an extravagant dinner there. While a few board members are too intimidated to speak out, one brave soul slips Ethan a copy of internal financial reports. The documents confirm what Ethan had long suspected. The HOA's finances were a farce, and Kerren was at the helm of it all. This mounting evidence transforms the conflict from a personal skirmish into a full-blown community uprising. Neighbors start sharing their own stories of intimidation, and the once feared HOA now faced a united front of property owners demanding transparency and accountability. For Ethan, this was a turning point, an opportunity to flip the narrative. With cameras rolling and voices joining his, he prepared for the next phase, exposing the entire web of deceit and forcing the HOA to answer for its abuse of power. In this segment, Kerren's tactics take a dramatic turn. One morning, Ethan awakens to find his driveway in ruins, plowed up and dug over as part of an alleged sidewalk expansion. The chaos is unmistakable. It's a direct attempt to force him off his property. Furious, yet composed, Ethan gathers his legal documents and evidence, ready for a public showdown at the next HOA meeting. At the meeting, as Kerren smugly defends her actions with hollow legal jargon, Ethan steps forward. "I have proof," he declares, laying out the file of documents and footage on the conference table. The room falls into an uneasy silence. Neighbors exchange shocked glances, and even a few board members begin to waver in their support. The evidence is damning. Detailed photos of his untouched property juxtaposed with the fraudulent claims of property improvements, audio recordings of Kerren's unauthorized orders, and screenshots of internal financial transactions that should have never taken place. As Ethan methodically presents each piece of evidence, the assembled crowd grows restless. A hush falls over the room as he plays a short video clip of Kerren on her phone, laughing dismissively while discussing plans to intimidate Ethan further. The clip resonates with the audience, many of whom had silently suffered under her rule. "Your power here is an illusion," Ethan tells her, voice steady and resolute. "Today we expose that illusion for what it is, a tool of tyranny." Kerren's eyes widen with panic, but she stubbornly refuses to concede. "This is all a misunderstanding," she protests, her voice trembling as she struggles to regain control. But it is too late. The HOA board members, now visibly shaken by the weight of evidence, begin to question her authority. One by one, they murmur their support for Ethan's claims. The once iron-clad front of the HOA starts to crumble before everyone's eyes. Outside the meeting hall, community members are already rallying together. Several neighbors approach Ethan afterward, thanking him for finally standing up against the overreach. "I've been living in fear of Kerren's fines for too long," one elderly resident confesses. "I'm glad someone is taking a stand." The solidarity builds into a quiet but powerful movement, a collective determination to reclaim their rights and hold the HOA accountable. Even as Kerren desperately attempts to rally her remaining supporters, the tide has turned. The public exposure of her fraudulent practices forces a wave of legal inquiries, and soon local authorities announce an investigation into the HOA's operations. Ethan's measured, brave actions have not only exposed the corruption, but have given the community hope that justice will finally prevail. For Ethan, this moment is bittersweet. His home, a symbol of his life's work and freedom, has been at the center of a bitter struggle. Yet, he realizes that his battle is larger than himself. It's a stand for every individual who has ever been bullied by an overreaching authority. And as the room fills with murmurs of agreement, Ethan silently vows that he will see this fight through until every fraudulent act is brought to light. In this segment, desperation drives Kerren to take one last extreme step. Not willing to lose her grip on power, she resorts to involving the police and hiring a private investigator, inadvertently setting the stage for her ultimate undoing. One crisp afternoon, the tension reaches a climax when Kerren calls the police, claiming that Ethan's brightly lit porch constitutes a public disturbance. The officers arrive promptly, a symbol of the heavy hand of authority. But when Ethan calmly presents his city official badge and his well-documented legal compliance, the officer's skepticism becomes evident. "We're here to serve the community, not to be used as pawns in a personal vendetta," one officer remarks, as he discreetly shares a knowing look with his partner. The police leave, and Kerren's face burns with humiliation. Not one to admit defeat, Kerren doubles down. She hires a private investigator to dig up dirt on Ethan, hoping to unearth something that could discredit him once and for all. But in a twist of fate, Ethan's security cameras capture the investigator creeping around his garage in the dead of night. The incriminating footage not only shows the investigator trespassing, but also clearly captures Kerren's distinct figure in the background, overseeing the operation. At the next HOA meeting, already charged with tension, Ethan surprises everyone by playing the footage for the entire neighborhood. Gasps and murmurs ripple through the crowd. "This is the proof we needed," Ethan states firmly. "You've all suffered under Kerren's abuse, and now it's time for her to face the truth." The room, once filled with the hushed whispers of subservience, now brims with anger and disbelief. Neighbors exchange determined looks, united by the clear evidence of misdeeds. Kerren's desperate move backfires spectacularly. The once confident enforcer is now reduced to a figure cornered by her own lies. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she stammers. But her protest is drowned out by the resounding chorus of community outrage. Some board members, previously loyal to her, now openly criticize her methods. "Your actions are illegal and unethical," one member declares, unable to hide the disappointment in their voice. With every second that ticks by, Kerren's position weakens. The legal ramifications of her actions become undeniable. Her blatant disregard for the law and for the rights of the homeowners now stands on full display. In a final desperate bid, Kerren attempts to pin the blame on external factors and claim that she was merely enforcing community standards. But the evidence, the recorded footage, the trespassing incident, and her own admission during heated exchanges tells a different story. As the meeting draws to a close, the community's mood is one of resolute defiance. Ethan's public display of evidence has not only exposed Kerren's fraudulent behavior, but has united the neighborhood against her tyranny. The final mic drop is delivered not with a dramatic flourish, but with a quiet certainty. Kerren's days as the HOA's enforcer are over. In this segment, the tide turns irreversibly against Kerren and the crooked HOA. With mounting legal pressure and an enraged community, the collapse becomes inevitable. Following the explosive meeting, news of Kerren's misdeeds spreads like wildfire. The community, now empowered by Ethan's evidence, mobilizes quickly. At a special assembly called by frustrated homeowners, a decisive vote is taken. The results are overwhelming. Kerren is ousted from the HOA. The remaining board members, shaken by the mounting evidence and public outcry, are forced to submit to a city investigation, leaving the once dominant organization in disarray. Within days, Kerren's personal assets begin to crumble. Her lavish spending becomes a subject of legal scrutiny. Her house is put on the market overnight, and whispers of her impending divorce fill the air. At one point, as she tries to hide behind a facade of defiant dignity, a once loyal board member mutters, "This is the end of your reign." The final act of public humiliation unfolds when she is seen in a local diner, trying to explain away her failures to disbelieving onlookers. Meanwhile, Ethan watches from his porch, a symbol of victory and resilience. As neighbors celebrate their newfound freedom from oppressive rules, Ethan quietly sips his coffee, reflecting on the long, arduous battle. His eyes, once filled with the frustration of injustice, now shine with quiet triumph. The community has not only reclaimed their rights, but has also taken a stand for fairness and transparency. The legal system soon catches up with the HOA. A class action lawsuit is filed on behalf of every homeowner who had suffered under the unjust regime. The city imposes a hefty fine on the HOA for its illegal practices, and several board members face legal consequences. Ethan, ever the calm strategist, plays a crucial role in coordinating with legal teams and ensuring that every scrap of evidence is brought to light. Kerren's final days in power are marked by bitter irony. In one final public confrontation, a former neighbor, once cowed by her threats, stands up and declares, "Your time is over, Kerren." The phrase echoes around the room, a resounding affirmation of the community's renewed sense of agency. With the HOA in shambles and Kerren forced to face her personal demons, justice, though slow, has finally prevailed. For Ethan, this victory is not just personal. It is a win for every homeowner who has ever felt powerless against an overbearing authority. The collapse of the HOA is a testament to the power of community action and the enduring spirit of individual rights. And as the dust settles, Ethan remains vigilant, knowing that the fight for justice is an ongoing journey, even as he savors the sweet taste of triumph. In the wake of the explosive expose that toppled Kerren's iron grip, the full force of the law swept in to dismantle the corrupt operations of the HOA. The local government launched an aggressive investigation, peeling back layers of red tape and secrecy that had long shielded the board's unethical practices. Every misused dollar, every fabricated fine, and every unauthorized policy was laid bare before the community and legal authorities alike. State inspectors and legal experts pored over mountains of documents that revealed a disturbing pattern of abuse. The records painted a picture of an organization that had systematically exploited homeowners' trust for personal gain. The findings were indisputable. Funds earmarked for community improvements had been diverted to cover extravagant personal expenses, and arbitrary fines had been used as a tool of intimidation rather than as a means of maintaining standards. United by their shared suffering, the homeowners rallied together with renewed purpose. What began as isolated complaints transformed into a powerful class action lawsuit, spearheaded by a group of determined local attorneys who had seen too many lives upended by the HOA's overreach. This legal battle wasn't just about retribution. It was about restoring faith in the very institutions meant to protect the community. The courtroom quickly became the stage where every misdeed was brought to light, as evidence flowed in from meticulous records, hidden financial statements, and first-hand testimonies. As the legal proceedings advanced, the impact was swift and severe. Fines of staggering proportions were levied against the HOA, crippling its financial resources and exposing the vulnerability of its once feared authority. With the pressure mounting, many board members found themselves forced into resignation, their positions rendered untenable by the flood of incontrovertible evidence and public outrage. The institution that had once dictated the minutiae of daily life was now disassembled, its reputation in ruins. Throughout this process, Ethan's role proved pivotal. His calm resolve and scrupulous documentation had laid the groundwork for every subsequent legal move. Working side by side with the legal teams, he provided key insights and evidence gathered from his own confrontations with the HOA. His efforts not only empowered the lawsuit, but also emboldened other homeowners to share their own harrowing experiences. In doing so, he helped forge a united front that could no longer be ignored. In one of the final courtroom sessions, a judge recited the penalties that would soon be imposed, a moment that symbolized the end of a long, dark chapter of corruption and intimidation. Stepping forward to address the court, Ethan's voice was steady and resolute. "This case isn't merely about misappropriated funds or broken rules," he declared. "It's about reclaiming our right to live without fear of arbitrary power. It's about ensuring that every member of this community can trust that justice prevails." His words resonated in the silent chamber, a powerful vindication not just for him, but for every homeowner who had endured the tyranny of unchecked authority. By the time the legal dust finally settled, the HOA had been irrevocably dismantled. Its former leaders faced legal consequences that served as a stern warning. No one is above the law. The legacy of this victory was not only a restored community, but also a renewed faith in collective action. The case became a landmark in local history, a testament to the power of community unity and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Kerren's world began to unravel on a scale she had never imagined. Once the unchallenged enforcer of HOA regulations, she was now a pariah, her reputation in tatters, and her authority completely dismantled. With the legal verdict against the HOA looming, the spotlight turned sharply on her personal misdeeds, exposing a cascade of errors and betrayals that no one could ignore. Rumors that had once circulated behind closed doors became front-page headlines. It emerged that Kerren had long misused HOA funds to finance lavish personal indulgences, exclusive dinners, designer wardrobe updates, and even expensive car that many suspected was far beyond the means of someone in her position. These revelations shattered any lingering aura of respect, and her colleagues, once intimidated by her iron will, began to distance themselves. One by one, those who had abided by her unyielding decrees stepped back, unwilling to be associated with the ensuing scandal. As legal proceedings tightened around the board, Kerren found herself increasingly isolated. Friends and allies turned their backs, and her support network evaporated under the harsh light of public scrutiny. It wasn't long before personal consequences caught up with her. In a dramatic twist that underscored the totality of her fall, the very assets she had once flaunted became liabilities. Her prize car was repossessed, a public and humiliating signal that her financial mismanagement had reached a critical tipping point. The pressures mounted further when her family life began to crumble under the weight of scandal. Her spouse, unable to endure the relentless media attention and the social ostracism that followed Kerren's every move, initiated divorce proceedings. The once stable household, built on a foundation of enforced order and rigid conformity, was now nothing more than a relic of a past life. Neighbors who had once feared her authoritative presence now whispered about the dramatic changes, watching as the high and mighty were brought low. The final, most bitter irony was reserved for her professional life. The community, having rallied behind Ethan's quest for justice, made it clear that Kerren's time as an enforcer was over. In an unexpected turn of fate, she was forced to resign from her position on the board. The organization she had striven to control now disavowed her entirely. With her career in ruins, Kerren found herself struggling to secure any semblance of employment. It wasn't long before a new opportunity, an assistant property manager position at a different, much smaller HOA, presented itself. The position was a cruel echo of her former life, a reminder that the power she once wielded had evaporated into nothingness. At a community event months later, as the scandal's dust settled and life moved forward, Kerren appeared in public for the first time. Gone was the haughty demeanor that once intimidated an entire neighborhood. Instead, she shuffled uncomfortably among residents who now regarded her with a mixture of pity and derision. When she passed by Ethan, a man who had become the unlikely symbol of justice and community resilience, he couldn't help but offer a wry, knowing smile. "I hope you enjoy following the rules," he remarked softly, a quiet testament to the poetic justice of it all. In that moment, the full extent of Kerren's downfall was unmistakable. From a self-styled enforcer of order to a cautionary tale of unchecked power and entitlement, her journey was complete. The fall of Kerren was not only a personal defeat, it served as a powerful reminder to the community that no one was above accountability. It underscored the principle that authority, when misused, would eventually crumble under the weight of truth and justice. In the months following the upheaval, a sense of renewal settled over the once tense neighborhood. The air felt lighter, as if the weight of past injustices had finally lifted. Homeowners gathered in community spaces not out of obligation, but in celebration of their reclaimed autonomy. Quiet smiles and soft laughter replaced whispered complaints, and a vibrant sense of unity permeated every street and front yard. Ethan, now a symbol of perseverance and justice, found solace on his beloved porch. The early morning light that once witnessed heated disputes now bathed him in a serene glow. Neighbors strolled by with warm greetings and anecdotes about simpler times, a time before the relentless tyranny of overzealous regulations. Their conversations, filled with genuine camaraderie, spoke of shared struggles and the power of standing together. At a modest neighborhood gathering, a subtle yet powerful moment unfolded. A longtime friend, with a mischievous glint in his eye, playfully presented Ethan with a novelty HOA violation notice for having too many smiles on his face. The room burst into laughter, a sound that, in that instant, symbolized the community's liberation from fear. Ethan accepted the tongue-in-cheek gesture with a gracious chuckle, a silent reminder of how far they'd come. The transformation was more than just a change in management. It was a complete cultural shift. The remnants of the old regime, its oppressive fines and unwarranted power, had been replaced by a spirit of mutual respect and empowerment. No longer would arbitrary rules dictate their lives, and every homeowner was now aware that their voice could indeed make a difference. As dusk approached one tranquil evening, Ethan took one last look at his porch, a place that had witnessed his battles, his victories, and the unwavering unity of his neighbors. He mused quietly to himself. They really tried, but in the end, truth always finds a way to shine through. His words, soft yet resonant, encapsulated the journey of a community that had turned its trials into triumph. In the final moments of that day, as twilight merged with the gentle hum of nightly life, the neighborhood seemed to settle into a newfound peace. The legacy of the struggle against overreach and entitlement was firmly etched into the hearts of those who had once suffered in silence. It served as a timeless reminder. When people unite for justice, even the most formidable forces of oppression cannot stand. And so, as the last light faded, a quiet celebration of freedom echoed in every home. The era of intimidation had ended, replaced by a community built on fairness, trust, and the unyielding spirit of its people. The mic drop moment was complete, a legacy not of conflict, but of hope renewed.